At 8:14 p.m. on a rainy Thursday, I was standing in my kitchen finishing expense reports for a manufacturing company when someone knocked exactly 3 times. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and 12 years earlier my parents had relocated 2 states away when I was 17, leaving only one handwritten note behind. Before I answered the door, I noticed another folded piece of paper resting beside my coffee mug, and for one impossible second it looked exactly like the note that had changed my life. That image would make sense only hours later. What I didn't understand then was that the story wasn't really about the night my parents disappeared. It was about everything that happened because they did, and about the quiet people who carried me long after the loud ones had walked away. Growing up, my family had an unspoken ranking system that nobody ever admitted existed. Whoever caused the fewest problems received the most approval. Whoever needed help slipped lower without anyone saying it aloud. My parents measured responsibility almost like a scoreboard. If you managed everything alone, you earned praise. If you asked for support, you were reminded how lucky you already were. Looking back, the folded note became the perfect symbol of that system. I kept the original inside the clear sleeve of my wallet for 12 years. The edges softened, the ink faded slightly, but the words stayed sharp enough to hurt every time I unfolded it. The only adult who quietly ignored those invisible rankings was my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. She was 68 when I was 17, retired after 38 years as an elementary school librarian, and somehow always seemed to know exactly when I needed a meal without asking why. Her chicken noodle soup came in the same blue ceramic bowl every Tuesday during winter. She remembered birthdays without writing them down. She taped newspaper crossword puzzles to my front door whenever she thought I'd been studying too much. Nothing she did was dramatic, which was exactly why it mattered. The difficult truth is that I helped normalize what my parents were doing. Whenever friends asked why mom skipped another school event or why dad forgot another promise, I made excuses before anyone else could. I called them busy. I said work came first. I convinced myself that independence was something to be proud of instead of something being forced onto me. Every excuse I made became another brick in a house that was already falling apart. The week before everything changed, I made sure there could be no misunderstanding. My parents insisted they needed to travel ahead for new jobs in Columbus, Ohio, while I stayed behind for a few weeks to finish my senior semester before joining them. I asked the same questions repeatedly because something didn't feel right. On March 18th, I texted my mother at 6:42 p.m. "So I'll stay here until graduation, then you'll come back?" She replied, "Yes. Everything is arranged." The next afternoon, I asked again while my aunt Denise was sitting at our dining room table drinking coffee. "So you'll both be back before May?" Dad nodded without looking up from his laptop. "That's the plan." I even wrote the moving timeline onto a yellow legal pad and placed it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. My mother checked each item with a blue pen while my aunt watched. I remember thinking witnesses made promises stronger. When I hesitated one last time, my father smiled with the kind of confidence that always made everyone else doubt themselves instead. "You'll figure it out," he said casually. "You always do." Everyone laughed softly, including me. I wish I had understood that sometimes the sentence people repeat most often isn't reassurance. It's a warning. At exactly 7:42 a.m. on March 24, 2014, I walked downstairs expecting to hear cabinet doors closing and my father's truck warming up outside. Instead, the house sounded hollow. Every room echoed. The living room was missing its photographs. My parents' bedroom stood open with empty closets and bare walls. On the kitchen counter sat a single folded piece of notebook paper held down by the lighthouse magnet from the refrigerator. Before I even opened it, I knew what it would say. 3 words were written in my father's block handwriting. "You'll figure it out." Nothing else. No address. No explanation. No promise to come back. I read it 3 times before reaching for my phone. My mother's number went straight to voicemail. My father's rang once before disconnecting. At 7:46 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from him. Asterisk, "We're already on the interstate. This is what's best for everyone. You'll figure it out. You always do. Asterisk." The sentence he had repeated for years suddenly stopped sounding encouraging. It became a lock clicking into place. I was still standing there holding the note when someone knocked softly on the back door. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. She had noticed the moving truck before sunrise and assumed I was helping load boxes. One look at my face told her she was wrong. I handed her the note without speaking. She read it carefully, folded it exactly the way she had found it, and gave it back. Then she surprised me. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She didn't tell me everything would somehow be okay. Instead, she quietly walked into my kitchen, opened my refrigerator, found 2 eggs, butter, and half a loaf of bread, and started making breakfast. "You need to eat while your mind still works," she said gently. "Problems don't become smaller on an empty stomach." That calm acceptance hurt more than if she had broken down. It meant the emergency was real. As she placed a plate in front of me, memories I had spent years excusing began lining up differently. Dad forgetting my 16th birthday because of a golf trip. Mom missing parent-teacher conferences but never missing work dinners. Christmas mornings delayed because business calls mattered more. School concerts where I searched every row knowing their seats would stay empty. Every disappointment had seemed isolated at the time. Sitting there with toast growing cold on my plate, I realized they had always pointed toward the same ending. I had spent years defending people who never defended me. By lunchtime, I stopped describing myself as abandoned only by my parents. I had abandoned myself first by accepting every explanation they gave. That realization was almost harder to survive than the empty house itself. I called my Aunt Denise first. She sighed before I finished explaining. "They must have had reasons, Claire. Don't make this bigger than it already is. Finish school and give them time." An hour later, I reached my Uncle Robert. "They're under a lot of pressure," he said. "Adults make difficult decisions. You'll understand someday." The words landed like fresh concrete. Neither of them asked where I would sleep. Neither asked whether I had enough food. Neither offered to come over. At 3:10 p.m., I sat inside the guidance counselor's office at Jefferson High School with the folded note lying between us. Mrs. Karen Ellis read it twice without saying a word. Finally, she looked directly at me. "Claire," she said quietly, "this isn't normal." 4 words. That was all. For the first time since 7:42 that morning, someone wasn't asking me to accept what had happened. Someone was giving me permission to admit it was wrong. I hadn't realized how badly I needed that until I heard it. 3 days after Mrs. Ellis called Child Protective Services, my parents finally answered a phone call. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse them. I offered the simplest compromise I could imagine. "Let me finish high school here," I said. "Come back after graduation, or let me stay with Aunt Denise until June. That's only 10 weeks. There was a long pause. Then my father answered with the same steady voice he always used when he wanted a conversation to end. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You'll figure it out. You always do." My mother added that their apartment in Ohio was too small for 3 people and that changing their plans would cost money they couldn't afford. Before hanging up, Dad gave me one last warning. "If you keep telling people we abandoned you, don't expect family to take your side. Relationships are easy to lose." It wasn't just a refusal. It was an ultimatum wrapped in guilt, reputation, and isolation. That phone call changed something permanent inside me. For weeks I had been trying to earn a better place inside the same family system that had already decided I was expendable. I suddenly understood there was no correct combination of patience, kindness, or obedience that would make people value me if they already benefited from not doing so. So I stopped applying for a better position in their version of my life. I started building my own. Mrs. Brooks helped me create a monthly budget on yellow legal paper. I worked 24 hours every week at a grocery store while finishing my senior classes. I earned a small scholarship, attended the state university 40 miles away, graduated with a finance degree, and accepted an entry-level analyst position starting at $51,800 a year. Promotions came slowly, but they came honestly. At 27, I signed the mortgage papers for a modest 3-bedroom house with a maple tree in the front yard. 1 bedroom stayed furnished even though nobody lived there. I never admitted it aloud, but some part of me kept a space open in case my parents ever chose to become parents again. Generosity and hope are not always the same thing. In April of this year, 12 years after the note, my mother sent her first meaningful message in almost 18 months. Asterisk, your father retired early. Things have been difficult. Maybe it's time to put the past behind us. Asterisk. I opened a blank reply. The first draft read, asterisk, you figured it out without me. Keep doing that. Asterisk. I deleted it. The second draft was even worse. Asterisk, you left a 17-year-old with a note. You don't get to ask for family now. Asterisk. I erased that one too. After staring at the screen for almost 15 minutes, I finally sent the only response I could live with. Asterisk, I'm willing to meet and talk. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be honest. I won't argue about what happened, and I won't pretend it didn't happen. Asterisk. Her reply arrived 6 minutes later. Asterisk, you're still dramatic. Asterisk. That was all. Thanksgiving arrived 7 months after that exchange. My dining room table seated 10 people, but 12 showed up anyway. 2 folding chairs came out of the garage. Mrs. Brooks insisted on carving the turkey herself, despite the arthritis in both hands. She had practiced with 2 roasted chickens the week before because she wanted to get it right. When everyone applauded after the first perfect slice, she laughed so hard she had to wipe away tears. Nobody cared that the mashed potatoes were slightly lumpy. Nobody complained that dessert came 30 minutes late. People stayed until almost midnight because nobody wanted the evening to end. 2 days later, my cousin Megan called. She had attended Thanksgiving with my parents in Ohio. The table looked beautiful, she told me carefully. Everything matched. The food was expensive. Then she paused. There were only 4 people there, Claire. Most everyone had other plans. I didn't celebrate hearing that. Loneliness isn't just as simply because it reaches the people who once caused yours. Driving Mrs. Brooks home that night, she rested the folded note on her lap. She still carried it whenever she thought I might need reminding of how far I'd come. You know, she said quietly, your parents probably learned love the same way they tried teaching it to you. That explains something. It doesn't excuse anything. I looked at the note before sliding it back into my wallet. Some wounds become scars. Some become maps. The hardest part is learning which one you're carrying. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, at exactly 8:14 p.m., the same time that unexpected knock had interrupted my work, my doorbell rang again. Through the front window, I saw my parents standing on the porch. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. For the first time in 12 years, they had come to me instead of expecting me to come to them. I didn't rush to answer. I finished washing the coffee mug in my sink, dried it with a towel, and straightened the stack of mail on the counter. They waited almost 4 minutes before I unlocked the door. Waiting wasn't punishment. It was simply the pace my life moved at now. My father tried to smile. We've always been family, he said. Years earlier, that sentence would have undone me. Now it was only a sentence. My mother stepped forward. We don't have to keep living in the past. Another familiar tactic. Skip the facts. Rush toward forgiveness. I invited them inside, but left them standing in the living room while I made coffee. The silence forced everyone to sit with what they had avoided for more than a decade. Finally, my father looked around the house. You've done well for yourself. I have, I answered. He waited for me to fill the silence with gratitude. I didn't. His shoulders relaxed in a way I'd never seen before, as though he had finally realized the old rules no longer worked. Then my mother asked the only honest question either of them had offered since I was 17. Did you ever stop waiting for us? I thought about the furnished guest room. The birthday cards I never mailed. The folded note inside my wallet. I stopped waiting for the parents I remembered, I said. I left room for the people you might still become. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then I told them the only condition that mattered. If you want a place in my life, don't start by apologizing to me. They both looked confused. You owe Mrs. Eleanor Brooks the apology first. Their expressions changed immediately. She fed me. She drove me to school. She sat through my graduation. She was the adult who stayed. If you can't acknowledge what she carried because you wouldn't, then nothing between us can be real. 2 days later, we drove together to Mrs. Brooks' small brick house. She opened the door wearing the same knitted blue sweater she had owned for years. I stayed outside on the porch. That conversation belonged to them. I never heard every word. I only know it lasted almost 40 minutes. When the front door finally opened again, my mother was crying quietly, and my father looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Mrs. Brooks didn't describe what had been said. She simply squeezed my hand once before locking her front door. Some conversations become sacred because nobody repeats them. That was one of them. Spring arrived early the following year. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Trust never returns all at once. It returns in ordinary moments that nobody photographs. The first Sunday of every month became dinner at my house. There was no assigned seating. Nobody sat at the head of the table anymore. Before we ate, each person folded a handwritten note and placed it into a wooden box beside the salt shaker. The notes contained one thing they were grateful for that month. At the end of every year, we read them together. The ritual belonged to everyone. The folded note that had once represented abandonment had become something entirely different. One evening, my father quietly reached across the table and refilled Mrs. Brooks' water glass before anyone asked. It was a tiny gesture. No speeches. No announcement. Just attention given without expecting recognition. For the first time, it felt natural. Mrs. Brooks sold her old house 6 months later and moved into a small cottage less than 10 minutes from mine. She joked that she was finally close enough to bring over soup before it got cold. At 80, she started volunteering twice a week at the local library again because, in her words, stories deserve second chances. So do some people. Not all, but some. The original note still lives inside my wallet. The paper is creased nearly beyond repair now. Every New Year's Day, I unfold it once, read the 3 words, fold it again, and place it back where it belongs. Not because it still controls me. Because it reminds me how far I've traveled from the girl who believed surviving alone was the same as being loved. I was 17 when my parents relocated 2 states away and left me with one sentence. 12 years later, I finally understood they had been accidentally right. I did figure it out. Just not in the way they expected. The strongest families aren't built by the people who leave you with a note. They're built by the people who stay long enough to help you write a better one.